Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Irish Goodbye Business Podcast, where we like to speak to real people who had real jobs and real success. And today we're speaking with one of the more successful and real people that I've had the pleasure of meeting in many years, Matt Elliott. He used to work at Bank of America, but he's a whole lot more than that. So, Matt, please say hello to us.
Well, it's very nice to think that I'm one of your successful guests. So thanks for that, Carl. Yeah, my name is Matt Elliott, and in the simple way you can frame it is that I'm a recovering banker. Spent 35 years in banking, including 22 at Bank of America and entities that became Bank of America. I had a lot of great jobs in banking, including at B of A, including things like I was president of Bank of America Michigan for 12 years. I led commercial banking businesses around the Midwest here. I'm in Detroit, born and bred in Michigan, and did that for a long time. And I also had led sustainability for commercial banking for a few years, which is how you and I met. And really enjoyed that relationship as well. But that's a little bit about me. What I do now, I left banking back in the fall, and I'm really trying to help leaders and their teams navigate chaos, navigate an ever-changing and accelerating changing world. And that's been a lot of fun. And we'll get into that as we go through today.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks for joining us today. And there's one question I always ask at the start and one I always ask at the end. So the one I always ask at the start is there any jobs you had along the way that taught you something that like an MBA or working for the 20 odd years in banking couldn't have given you? Like for me, it was bartending. I learned to really understand people. So any job you had along the way that just gave you nuggets that really kind of led you through your life?
I think if you're paying attention, you're going to learn, at every job, right? For me, a couple of things that really hit me were my first real W-2 job. I worked at Taco Bell, and I specialized in the drive-through, which back then required you to multitask quite a bit. This is pre-headset days now, okay? So I learned an awful lot doing that, working with like real people. I also did an internship back at Bethlehem Steel. And that was one of those things where, hey, listen, kids, stay in school because, there I had several, leaders, foremen in the plant, for example, say, stay in school. And then I went out and saw what a day in the life was like and thought, yeah, I'm staying in school, you know? And then, along the way, I had a lot of friends who chose maybe different paths, sometimes paths that seemed really, really cool. And then I looked at the human toll of what that was really like. And I was glad that I chose the path I did, and everyone has to make those choices. But for me, those are a few things that stick out.
Awesome. Yeah, I must say, in order to really, really enjoy your current job, you had to have had a terrible one along the way.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple of jobs that I won't name the companies that out of respect for them, because as bad as the jobs may have been, when I'm back in Ireland, I'm driving up to my mom's house and I look at that building and I go, I don't work there anymore. That's
yeah. For me, it was as much about people. Like, I'm glad I don't work for this person.
Right.
You get a chance to, I used to have I used to call it boss selection. Did a really good job of picking bosses. And there are a few times, more often than not, where the boss was picked for me. And, sometimes you learn from an example of what you don't want to be. Right.
Yeah.
But you still have to work for but you still have to work for those people. You still have to perform. And, you have to find the way it works. And who knows, I probably might not have been the greatest employee all the time either.
Well, hopefully you are. But what I say is, it's that old adage, you join a company and you leave a boss.
There's a lot of truth to that. And I think, more often than not, that's the case, because for 95% of employees, the boss is the company.
Yeah.
The boss really determines sort of the day-to-day experience and the envelope of experience that you're going to have. And, that's for me, one of the things that I, cherish so much about leadership. And I think it's so critical because it really does have a huge effect on someone's, day-to-day experience and therefore their life.
Excellent. Well, so in your leadership style, when you make an Irish goodbye move in business, do you quietly exit meetings, or do you like to leave and leave a big impression, or do you like to leave somebody to have that big impression? Because I know you, and it's not always about you, right? So I know how your mind thinks.
Yeah, well, more often than not, if it's about you, then it's not about much. My wife and I in our friend group are famous for saying, "Hey, we're here for a good time, not a long time."
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I roll in business too. I always would tell my team, and I believe this firmly myself, like never leave a meeting without homework. And so for me, the Irish goodbye was making sure you touch base with that person or people that you want to talk to, and then just, saying peace out. That's usually what I would do. Um, later on in my career, especially when you'd have the offsite or do the other things, I was never the guy that closed down the bar. But on the other hand, I always wanted to, spend enough time with people where I felt like I got to know them as a human level too. So there's a fine line in there that takes some experience to find, but generally that's how it works.
Very good.
Yeah.
I might have closed on a couple of bars, so on the other side of that.
In my younger days, I'm sure I was the wingman of somebody who said, we're out for the duration.
I like what you said there, though, in terms of having to take away homework, because I see it often from the sales side, and you're being primarily the client, right?
Yep.
And one of the things I tell the people I mentor is, if you're asked 6 questions in a meeting, don't answer all 6 of them, even if you know the answers. Take 2 of them away and have to come back with the answer, because then you keep the lines of communication open.
Yeah.
Well, if I give you all 6 answers, and then I say to you, well, Matt, what do you think? You go, well, I'm going to think about these and come back to you in 2 weeks. Whereas if I say to you, I got 2 answers here I need to come back to you with, I can come back, tag on a question, and just keep this drip feed of communication going. And I don't think enough people do that. So the taking homework away is imperative.
It is, a good sales experience is about the experience. It's not necessarily about the answer. You build trust during that walk. And so you have to create a conversation. And if you do your job well as a salesperson, what you're really doing is solving problems. That's how you do it. That's how you generate value. And more often than not, the problem that you'll end up solving is not the one that the client says they have.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing too is that I find that a lot of my best business friends, the best relationships I made in business, had a moment of conflict. Sometimes even started with a conflict. In fact, there was a guy who hired me one time. This is during one of my stints outside of banking. He ended up hiring me, but our first conversation started with him firing us. and it led to me working for him, and he's still a great friend now.
But the reason I got the job at Salesforce for Bank of America was because when I worked at Oracle and I was meeting with E-Trade, I was Terran Douglas, and he beat me in and out of the ground for 3 hours because of how bad we were doing. I just took over the account, but it was that sort of human empathy that he's about. His kid's come over from Ireland. He's just taken a beating. He's earned the right to have a follow-up meeting, and then you touched on it there: trust and active listening, and that exactly what you just said there. What the client says is the problem often is only a symptom of the problem. So if somebody says, "Oh, I can't get reporting," you don't go, "Oh, we do reporting. Here you go." It's like, why can't you get reporting? How have you tried it? And probably turn out it's a data issue, not a reporting issue.
Yeah.
But people don't understand that. But let me just pull on one thread there slightly. You mentioned trust. So how do you build trust, or how does trust get built with you? Because I think it's different for everybody, and I love to understand how people understand trust to them.
Yeah. Well, first of all, for me, trust is absolutely critical. We do business with people we know, like, and trust. So, and as a person, like I really have a very low tolerance for people I don't trust. The best definition of trust I've ever heard, and it fits with, I think, the way I try to build it, is a series of promises dutifully kept. And you're basically someone who keeps their promises, and you do it in a very conscientious way. And if you do that, then you earn trust. That once I heard that, it goes back several years now. That for me has been the way I've always tried to keep it.
Yeah, there's probably the same concept, but the one I love is my say-do ratio has to be a 1-to-1. Yeah, it makes it real easy for me. If I promised you 3 things, I need to deliver 3 things.
Yeah. And then I think another one that is really important is, do you show up in the moments that matter? Do you show up when it's hard? I had a leader that I worked for, this was during the pandemic, who just disappeared. And the rest of us had to sort of figure it out. And listen, I don't know what that person was going through during the experience. She didn't share anything. But boy, it sure eroded a lot of trust. When you're there and the bullets are flying and the team really needs guidance and that person's not there, makes it really tough on the rest of the team.
100%.
Yeah.
And trust isn't just a client vendor or client partner thing. It's trust in your teammates. It's trust in the people who report to you, the people you report to.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of every relationship we have, whether it's your marriage, your business base, or your friendships.
1,000%. And Stephen Covey wrote this book, The Speed of Trust. Once you develop it's a superpower. And organizations that have high trust, even if they don't have a perfect system or a great strategy, can really compete well. The first bank I worked for is a place called NBD Bank back in the early 90s. Yes, that's how old I am. I had a very clunky kind of corporate structure, but performed beautifully.
Yeah.
It was because there was a very strong culture that operated at a high level of trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So bringing you back to kind of where you started and to where you are now, how would you define success between then and now?
When I first started in business, I'm from the middle of Michigan, Carl, a small town. My dad was a school teacher. My dad taught school both during the day and middle school, and he taught firefighting at night. My mom was an administrator at a hospital, so not a privileged background, not a disadvantaged one either. But I came out of school with a high level of fear. I really felt like I needed to perform and take care of myself, and so I was really more focused on outcome. And over time, what I've realized is that outcomes are a function of process. And so I am a lot more focused on process. Like, am I doing the things that I know want to lead to the outcomes I want? And now that I'm at this stage of my career, I've had some level of success. I'm focused on impact. Did I leave it better than I found it? Did I leave the people that I led and lead better than I found them? When I'm a speaker now, did I leave that audience with something that will make their life better right now? And those are the things that I think about now.
Awesome. So if you met yourself at the age of, say, 25 or 30, you met yourself on a road, what would you say to you, or what do you think would surprise that 30-year-old version of you so much more than,
Yeah. The number one thing I would have told myself is lighten up. For sure. That was the number one thing I would have said. I was really high strung, wound up, and I thought I knew a lot of stuff. Our son is 27 and our daughter just turned 25 yesterday. Unfortunately, there are times when our son reminds me of me. Like he knows an awful lot about an awful lot. But in real life, it would have been better for me to have toned it down a little bit, listen a little more, and life would have been a lot more fun. But that's where I was, and this is where I am now, and I've learned a lot in the process.
Well, look, I know you a few years now, and you don't strike me as somebody who doesn't pull fun out of life.
I do.
Yeah. So
yeah,
my grandmother used to have a sticker on her fridge years ago, long before I even knew what it meant. I had teenagers leave now, take over the world, and do it while they still know everything.
There you go.
So I think that's the universal guidance. So
exactly.
If you were kind of that serious and driven, is that a mindset that you had, or is there a perhaps the grit from seeing your father's kind of teach 2 sets of grades and then be a firefighter, which, I mean, look, that takes mindset and grit beyond. Like the construction company I had was structural fire protection. So we used to work with the firefighters to help design the basic egress of a building if it was in flames. And that's just the level of awe I had for these people who would run into a burning building when everyone else was trying to get out of it. Right? Right? There's a mindset that goes with that. So is there a mindset that's kind of pulled you through tough times and good times that's always been with you?
I don't know that it's always been with me, but I learned it early on in my 20s. And that is that life can change in the blink of an eye. And I can tell you, Carl, like there have been those moments where, just something happens, either a mindset shift or a circumstance changes, things line up, and all of a sudden you're heading this way and boom, you're going this way. Mm-hmm. And I've learned to trust that. And, the way my wife and I started off our careers in Chicago, the way I got back to Michigan was through one of those moments, I had been contacted by a headhunter for a job here in Michigan, and I finished second in the in the bake off. And so at the time I was maybe 31,
Right.
and the guy who won the first round, the preferred candidate, was somebody who's closer to my age now, late or 50s. And so the thing of it was, he was coming from Chicago too, and the headhunter said, there's a chance that the trailing spouse might not be there on Detroit, so who knows? I said, okay, fine. Ann and I thought for sure we were going to be Chicagoans, and we were at peace with that. And then I get a call 3 days later saying, well, the spouse didn't get there on Detroit, and they want you. This is on a Friday. They want you, in Detroit on Monday. Just like that, life changed.
Yeah.
So whole trajectory of the career changes, trajectory of life. We get and it's been undeniably better because we were there for that. And I think a lot about what it took to get to that place. But if you put yourself in position to have those experiences enough, they happen.
Absolutely. To me, life comes down to about 10 decisions, and then how you work between each one of those decisions.
That's fair. Yeah. It might even be fewer than 10, but it's a handful.
Yeah. And it's real pivotal moments in your life. And the difference between, and I say this from my own perspective, I moved to America at the age of 39 with a lot of people who were close to me out of a place of love saying, you're too old to start again. What are you doing?
Are you out of your mind? Yeah.
Yeah. And I learned that they weren't telling me that I was too old to do it. They were saying that they'd be scared to do it.
Uh-huh. Oh my God. I hear that now all the time, because I'm in the middle of changing my career. And I have a lot of ex-colleagues and friends who are saying, I love your message. I really admire what you're up to. If I had a kid, never do it, And I feel like, Carl, maybe you felt the same way. I don't feel like I have a choice. Like as I look at my alternatives, this is the one that seems most appealing. So I'm doing it.
Yeah. And what you do for a living has to pull life out of you.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, you're waiting to die. Right.
Exactly.
And there's the one thing I would say to people who are in a job they hate, I pity them. And I don't mean that from a sense of I'm better than you or anything. I like honest empathy. If you're in a job you hate, I have huge empathy for you because it's such a large part of your life to get to something that doesn't bring you joy.
Yeah. When you're that person who feels stuck and who sees the job as just a paycheck, that's a tough place to be. And those are literally, to me, the kinds of situations that take years off your life. And it's really critical that you find some meaning and some joy and some substance and sustenance from your work. But I will say that the pace of change, the speed of change, the pressure that we're all feeling makes that really tough. And I will say also, it's never always like that. You're always going to have these moments when you oscillate around some sort of an average or a mean, right?
Of course.
But when you're too far below the curve for too long, those are those moments when you end up burned out. And those are those moments that you need to make changes for yourself.
I love that.
Believe me, I know, I've been there.
I love that you said that because I was talking to my wife recently about this, and she was asking me, "Will you slow down? Like you're working a lot lately." And I said, "You're going to burn out." I said, "Well, I believe you burn out when you're doing something you don't enjoy." I thoroughly love my job. I moved to America 12 years ago, and I get to meet people like you and people like Karen, people like Stephen Shannon, and I get to be in positions where a guy from a small town in Ireland, 25,000 people, who is a construction worker. This isn't the average path, and I'm sitting here with you, and I'm glad we were on the mindset question because this brings me back to. I know I didn't necessarily kind of run through this with you, but I'm fascinated by your thoughts about the power of and. Could you please explain that to me? Because I know that's a mindset you have, and it's when you broke that down for me when we spoke recently. It's kept me in a loop of thought on it. So I'd love you to explain it.
Okay. So what I've learned and observed over the years, and especially when I learned this initially when I did loan syndications, is that if you're in a situation where you need to be right, and I get everything and you lose everything, you may win that battle, but you are going to lose that war. Okay. The world is not a zero-sum game. And so very often what we do in order to try to make sense of a world that's increasingly chaotic and stressful is that we want certainty, we want speed, and what's the simplest, easiest kind of decision to make? It's a binary decision, yes or no, good or bad, black or white, you name it, right? But in reality, the real lasting victories, the ones that don't have winners and losers, that don't have heroes and villains, those are the ones that are an and. It's driven by the power of and. This idea that, yes, and you can hold two truths together that seem to be in conflict, but as you resolve that conflict, you end up in a better spot than you would have been before. So if you set things up and you think about it, like from a transaction perspective, or even in your work, Carl has to be right and Carl has to be happy and Matt has to be happy for us collectively to be successful. Let's go figure that out rather than having an arm wrestling match over who's right and who's wrong. Okay. That's not productive. So on the one hand, we can develop a shared sense of success. And then on the other hand, you can say, listen, I want us to be, we're going to have profit and purpose. This is one of the things I loved about, and do love about the ethos of B of A. We're going to have profit and purpose. And like, if you say that, and then you square the circle around what it takes to do that, that drives you to a different place than if you say, we're going to maximize profits at all costs, regardless. And oh, by the way, over a long period of time, you're going to make more money doing profit and purpose. That's the real key. And that's ultimately the power of and. As I share this concept with people, in fact, we used it for as the theme for a conference that I chaired here in Michigan a few years ago. That happens every year. It's still the most resonant theme that everyone can remember because it sits with people, it resonates with folks, and it also changes the way that you approach, transactions, relationships, opportunity, risk, all these things.
Yeah, I love it. As I said, I know it's dissimilar, but not very dissimilar to sort of the 6 Hats of decision making by Ed DeBono. But what I love about it is it doesn't have to. Nobody has to lose for you to win, for the decision to be right. Like, what do we want to be, successful or right? I think that's what we need to come down to, right? And I think everybody, if they're truly asked that question, they'd rather be successful. Like,
the way I frame it is, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? Pick one.
Yeah.
Now, this is what happened. I learned this really from my wife, who said, okay, we're about ready to have an argument. Think hard about this. Do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? I want to be happy, honey. And I gave a talk recently and I asked the room that question. I said, gentlemen, you ever heard this before? Does this resonate? Everybody raised their hand.
I think that's just proof that EQ is higher on one side of the demographic than other, right?
Yeah.
But like, you can see him without getting into anybody's politics. You can see in politics around the world what the either or does.
Oh.
It leaves a huge chunk of people feeling unrepresented, bitter, right? And it doesn't matter which side of the coin it lands on. You have nearly 50% of the population feeling unrepresented and unhappy. And what they will do is that they'll build to tear it down rather than to help build it up.
Yeah, and the things that the purists, if you will, the ideological purists will do in the name of being right. So I was at this policy conference that I chaired a few years ago. It's called the Mackinac Policy Conference. I was there this year, and there were 2 political voices that were sort of providing some perspective on the current moment. And one of them, who used to be a conservative, said basically, listen, the list of boxes that you have to check in order to be considered, a member of the party has more boxes than I can possibly check.
Yeah.
And this other woman who's from the other side of the political spectrum said, yeah, I feel the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I have this conversation constantly, is that, in order to be ideologically pure, not just here in the US, but I think in other places around the world,
Of course.
you have to sign up to an increasingly long list of stuff that's not representative of people.
Yeah.
And then what makes it worse is that the incentive structure, really disincents everybody from trying to find that and. And to me, that's the thing that, as the people who own the country, who run the country here, and I think around the world, need to stand up and say, enough, this is what we actually want. And we don't need to be perfect. We need to be happy.
100%. Like, as an immigrant to this country, I love that I'm an immigrant because I get to not have to stamp one side of the coin.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say I'm probably fiscally conservative, but I would be emotionally libertarian, but I don't think to the nth degree of either side, right? Because even on the financial side, I do believe in a meaningful and free third level education. I do believe anybody over the age of 65 should have some level of free healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in that middle piece, you pay. But this is the wonder, and this I'm kind of laboring this point because I think this really shows the power of the and. And
Well, you love this, Carl, and I think this goes exactly to your point. As I was stepping out of one career and spending some time imagining the art of the possible on the other, I met with a few people, a few of whom said, "Hey, have you ever thought about, I love your and idea. That sounds like something you might, you could campaign on." And I said, "Well, okay, number one, that sounds like some version of hell to me, but the other thing is like from a practical point of view, there's no party that would have me. I don't check enough boxes." And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, and but let's step off sort of the political mindset before we lose half an audience. But even in the business mindset, there's a lot of people who don't know how to win clean or win nice.
Yeah.
Like that phrase, show me a bad loser and or show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser. Show me a bad winner and I'll show you somebody who shouldn't win. Like if you win and then herald it over the people you beat, rather than trying to go and include them and say, well, look, there's aspects of yours and mine that were actually similar. Let's try and implement them and bring people who are opposing you with you. In every aspect of life, there's got to be better.
Yeah, I'm a real dork. I'm a real math guy, and I've always thought a lot about those things in terms of game theory, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this concept of a single round game versus a multi-round game. Single round games, by definition, are zero sum. Okay, so there's a pot of money in the table. We're going to do this one time. My incentive structure is to reach over and grab as much of that pot as possible. That's when I think that the mindset of you got to be a strong winner comes from. The reality is, though, that life is a multi-round game. Like, our first interaction is just one of potentially thousands. And so if I take everything in that first round, are you ever going to trust me again? Are you going to want to work with me again? I've just made everything harder. So even though I won that first round, what about round 99? What about round 999? And I've always been a big believer in relationships and multiple rounds. Okay, so we're going to do this together. And so, I personally, as a leader, have never been hung up on trying to win that first round,
of course,
but keeping more focus on ultimately what is that shared win that's going to keep us at the table longer so we can go farther together.
And look, from a sales capacity, I think you articulated it far nicer than I'm going to, but I tell everybody I mentor is I don't worry if Matt's going to buy off me today. I worry will Matt buy off me in 2 years.
Yeah.
And I can only do that by, this seems the common thread through this as being trust, empathy, and winning nice, right? And we can all do that. I think we all are going to benefit massively.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, there are a lot of people have different mentalities and you'll see that mentality come through in different industries. In the financial world in particular, you get a lot of zero-sum mentality. But it depends on where you sit and what your job is. But I was always kind of a tried to be a longer term thinker.
So that being said, is there a lesson you've learned along the way that you had to learn the hard way that you can share with us? We don't have to learn it the hard way.
Well, it was going back to our conversation about happy versus right.
Yeah.
When I was a younger man, I remember one time somebody characterizing me as an angry young man because I was always frustrated with, something about the corporate structure or some decision that somebody in credit made. You know what I mean? Like the typical things that when the world's not showing up exactly the way you want it, you get pissed off about. Right? And so for me, that was a hard-won lesson. And I remember, later on in my career, coaching a couple of people who just, were wired for right. They needed the world to show up, the way that they thought was correct. And frankly, from an academic point of view, weren't wrong. And had the world showed up the way it was supposed to, or the way or the way they wanted to, life would have been objectively better. That's just not the circumstance.
No,
I mean, maybe part of that is I'm a golfer, and you'll learn the fact that you have to wear your really bad shot, and you're going to get tough breaks and bad lies.
yeah.
And the way that you overcome that is don't don't follow up mistake one with mistake two, or God forbid, mistakes 2 and 3.
But my father's an avid golfer, and one of the things he says, we would pick Rory McIlroy just because he's Irish. He said,
and a hell of a player.
Yeah. But he said, why do you think he's really good at getting out of bunkers? Because he expects to find himself in some bunkers.
Yeah.
You know?
I've only learned this a few years ago, but one of the things that Tiger used to do, and I think a lot of good players do, is they would play forward bad shots in their minds. Normally you say to yourself, I'm going to visualize only perfect. He would go ahead and visualize, well, what happened if I fire one in the water on 12 at Augusta National? What am I going to do? So if in fact the ball went in the water on 12, he had already mentally had that rep, and he knew how he was, he had already had a chance to feel it and do it. Yeah. And I think that's really healthy to go, to game plan through, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that when and if it happens, you can handle it. I had one of these situations a few weeks ago. I was actually in the senior club championship where I play, and I found myself actually in the lead on the back nine on Sunday.
Very cool.
Which I have never even been in the conversation for in my life. Now, I did not, I didn't get it done for lots of different reasons, but I didn't cave either.
Yeah.
And part of it was, I had mentally kind of gone through, all right, if I hit a chunky shot, how am I going to react? And so, I did win, one part of it. I won my flight. I finished second overall, but that's miles better than I had ever done. And I think it was all because my brain kept me in the game.
Yeah, and it's allowing yourself be in the moment and be vulnerable in the moment without overthinking it, then putting excess pressure on yourself.
And telling yourself some story about, oh my God, you're going to make a 6 and blah, blah, blah. Like, just hit the shot.
I spoke about this with a friend of mine. That voice in your head is never positive. Always fear. And everything you want is on the other side of fear. But you can't turn that voice off. So you have to create a second voice that argues with it. At least that's how I've done it. But so that voice goes, shit, Carl, what if we can't do it? And that second voice goes, well, what if we can? And just, then that's the first voice doesn't have an answer because it's only fear.
Yeah. Well, that is exactly it. And it is fear. And the way I work on that, and I worked on it a few weeks ago when I was in that tournament, was I would have that thought and I would just sort of let it sit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would focus back on the shot I wanted to hit.
Fantastic.
Didn't deny it, didn't try to have a conversation with it, you know what I mean? But just said, okay, you felt it, let it flow. Don't let that. More often than not, I mean, it was a 2-day tournament, so it takes a while. But you never want that to be the last thought in your mind before you act. You want a positive, affirmative thought, so that you're giving your body positive instruction. And the same thing in business. You want to walk into that meeting, that conversation, with a positive instruction about how I'm going to be, and it's got to be something that is in your locus of control, something that you can own, so that you're not hung up on outcome. You're focused on how you want to play your shot.
Yeah. Well, you touched on business there, and I know you're a keynote speaker. I know you give speeches on the power of and, but I know you do a lot more. So can you let us know, kind of, you're not with Bank of America anymore. What is it you're doing now?
Well, a couple of things. One is, think about it in 2 sleeves. One is an advisory piece, and the other one is this communications and thought leadership piece. And they all go together. The whole concept here is what I call taming chaos. This idea that we weren't built for the level of change that we're experiencing, and as fast as it's going today is the slowest day we're ever going to have for the rest of our lives. Like, let that sink in, right?
That's crazy.
So that takes a ton of work. I have a tremendous amount of respect for what it takes to lead through an experience like that. And my goal is to try to help those leaders and their teams not just get through it, but actually thrive through the change. And so the way that I'm doing it is, on the one hand, doing advisory work and board work. So I'm joining boards of directors and working with mainly C-suites on helping them navigate the next thing. I mean, I've got a meeting with a company coming up here in a couple of days that's an ESOP, and I have some experience with ESOPs, and like all of the nuance of turning the reins over to the employee group and doing it in a way that keeps everybody incented and moving forward. That's really complex. I've or I am talking about joining boards with the idea of the same thing of helping leaders navigate change. And then on the other side, as you said, I'm building the keynote practice. I'm also writing a book that I've had a lot of fun writing to basically create a playbook for how you actually tame that chaos, to create a repeatable system so that it's something that you can turn into a practice.
Right.
And that it's not just an event. This is a mindset and a way that you can use the power of to keep yourself in that and place and not get, overcome by events and overcome by the chaos.
That's one thing that I think is key. And I don't know if it came through in the last little conversation we had about it. The and isn't singular. It continues to roll.
Yeah.
So it's not like, well, we've gotten through this one, let's move to the next one. The and should bleed in, and it becomes an evolving thing. So can you explain that in a little more detail?
Yeah. So once you realize that there's this topic, when I have really spent more time looking at the science behind this, what really causes us to get into either or, there's some very good and valid reasons why we would be in a war. When you're in a crisis, you don't have time to sort of navel gaze and sit around. You got to make some decisions, right? And ultimately, you have to decide. The question is, do you decide too quickly? Do you decide too unilaterally? And is there a way to continually reassess and keep enough people at the table so that we're all heading in the right direction? So I developed a really simple 3-step framework with the help of some folks that have a psychology and adult training background. So the first one is pause and reflect, like stop, pause and reflect, and get clear on what's most important and who's most important. And the idea here is that, hey, you can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Right.
And so let's get really clear on what matters most. And then the second one is find the and. What is the thing that if we're looking at as an or, that if we just switch that to an and would make all the difference, that would align us, that would propel us forward because we'd have to change and iterate. And then once you define that and you commit to it, and then you test and learn new ideas, think of it agile development sort of experience. But the key about those is that you just maintain this experimental mindset for a while. And this is what I mean by not deciding too fast. And that you keep that aperture of exploration open. And then as collectively you learn, you share that out. So then you scale these victories. And then you go back to the top and you do it again. So it becomes a wheel, it becomes a practice. What's been really fun is that as I've shared this with people over the last 9 months or so, what I didn't expect is how many people react to it as a practice they can use on themselves first and then on their teams. I shared this with a group of stressed out auto supplier CEOs back in May. And, had a lot of people coming up to me over cocktails going, hey, this was really helpful. And I want to talk to you about this, just you and me. And so a lot of these conversations have started off with the concept of, hey, I want to give you a tool for your team. But the starting point has very often been the leader and I having that discussion amongst each other first.
So if people want to find out more about that, is it bluelakeideas.com? Is that where they go?
Yep. bluelakeideas.com, all one word. And that will give you the overview. And, this is a relatively new practice for me, but I'm having a ton of fun connecting with people on it. And the traction's been great.
Well, it's the least stress I've seen you look in years, sir. So it's fantastic. But I will put the link in the description below. So if people want to know more about it, they can. As we're coming to the end here, Matt, I have to say it's once again always a pleasure speaking with you. Always a pleasure hanging out with you. So we do have one question we ask of everybody as we're about to leave. So I'm going to ask this question, you're going to answer, and we're going to hang up. Okay. So the question is, as we get up to leave the bar and we're going to leave, and we have 2 people waiting to take the seats behind us, what's the one bit of advice you would write on a beer napkin to leave behind us for the next person?
Focus more on what you can give than what you can get.
I love that. Well, Matt, thank you. You've given us a lot today, so we appreciate you greatly. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was great to see you, Carl. Thank you.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.